the creative industry is kind of shattering, and creative practices are turning up in every other industry.
Ivan, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're currently Chief Creative Officer at what3words, but you have a history of being a real champion of creativity in businesses. You have an enviable client list with some incredible names on there, such as KFC, Dove, Coca-Cola, Philips, to name just a few. And you've been Global Creative Director at Ogilvy and Adam&Eve, so I'm sure you have some great insight to share of managing broad range of diverse teams. Perfect for our conversation today about age. Now you're Chief Creative Officer at what3words, so I'd love to know a bit more about your current role and what you enjoy about it.
So, what3words was actually a client before I started working there permanently. So after I'd left Adam and Eve and advertising and turned my back on that, I was really interested in how businesses can use their own creativity every day. So there's the brand bit and the advertising bit, and there's also just problem solving. And what3words was a place that was just that I hit them at the right moment when they were just scaling up, and I could contribute really meaningfully in a lot of different ways across the product, but also how we spoke to potential partners, etc. So that role has kind of developed and grown over the last 8 years. You know, I was a creative director for a long time, and then got the promotion to Chief Creative Officer, mostly because I'd been doing the job already for years, basically. You know, so but I think that for me it was really important to get that title, not just because it sounds cool, but what it does is it sets a kind of a tone of respect for creative people and creativity inside of a tech business, and that there is some way for my team to aspire to. I think it's really important that you're not stuck, and that if you work in-house, that you can contribute meaningfully to a business, not just to your department.
That's a really great point. I love that you recognise that your team needs that ambition and that drive, and to know what opportunity there is for them as well. That's really powerful. What is your team makeup at the moment? How many people do you have in the creative department at the business?
Well, creative people, 150 plus.
Wow.
So, but I am the creative director of a business, and I always thought everyone is creative. The studio is 14 people, and we're based in London, Mongolia, and Vietnam. And then we sit inside parallel to a marketing team. So we're one gang, basically.
And when we last spoke, you did mention that there is quite a nice range of ages actually within that team that you have currently. In your mind, how do you think generational diversity impacts creativity?
I mean, creativity is a broad church. And I think from my perspective, it's important to be really generous about what creativity is and how problems are solved. Some of that comes from experience, just having done it a long time. Some of it comes from energy and ambition. And so having a good mix of, I suppose, styles and personalities in your team is really important to keep it fresh and keep those different viewpoints adding to the mix of what the business creates. And I think, one way to think about each project is not necessarily what is that project and how creative was it, but how does the whole thing fit together as one brand experience?
Yeah.
What are you all building together? And for that to work properly, you need empathy with an outside audience that you may never have met. So what3words works across the world. I mean, I think our core languages are about 12 languages that we work in.
Wow.
For marketing.
Yeah.
Right. That's not even the app, which works in 65 languages. So, what do I know about a entrepreneur in Bangladesh? Not a huge amount, but things I have learned in my experience is like how to build a framework around that, how to learn about that. But then you get the age differences. You also get, I suppose, a difference in familiarity with different platforms as well.
Yeah.
So TikTok, I don't find that interesting, but I work with people who live on TikTok, and that can be generational. It's also attitudinal. So it's really good to have that mix and respect those different viewpoints in the team.
Absolutely. And there must be particular strengths per generation that you can see, not just through the channels that they choose to consume, but through the qualities and strengths that they bring to work. Can you pinpoint what unique qualities perhaps different generations bring to creative problem solving?
I mean, I think it's very lumping people into broad generational lumps like that is not completely useful, because I think too often we talk about generational shortcomings rather than strengths. And to your point of like, what are the strengths people bring? So whoever you are in my team, I expect you to be curious, to keep learning, to have a strong opinion, but don't hold it too firmly.
Nice.
and be prepared to be wrong. So I've hired people who have been older than me to, my head of video for a long time was 10 years older than me. Much more like wise in the world, I suppose. But his attitude was, I'm here to learn about things I didn't know about in terms of how brands work or how businesses work or even management of people. My younger colleagues, what they bring is energy, some like just a freshness of thinking, difference of thinking as well. And that can be frustrating because you're like, why aren't you thinking the way I want you to think? You give up on that after a while. It's just everyone's going to do their own thing. But I think it's more like, I don't know if I could actually say it's about each generation brings a particular strength. I think it's attitude, it is character, and then the older generation have to be much more like open to training and sharing and less ego. And I need the young generation to almost do exactly the same, like relax, trust the process, but also look for kind of people whose jobs you want and work like that. So the dialogue is important.
Your attitude to learning is something that we spoke last time we caught up, actually. It's something that you've made a real concerted effort to stay involved in new ways of working and new tech and that sort of thing. What's your approach to learning and kind of staying current in what you do?
I'm lucky to be a naturally curious person.
Yeah.
And always trying to work out how to make things better. That's partly why I was a good art director and a good advertising creative, is that I can look at the same problem again and again and again and keep coming up with different solutions, different ways of saying the same thing. So that's a lucky natural skill that I have. And to go with that is just a love of craft and making. So if you're trying to make things better, there's always another book to read and ignore most of it. That's fine. There's always new software to kind of try and wrap your head around and keep current about how to get great results with less work. I have this, it's a completely daft thing to say to people, but my ambition is to work as little as possible.
Love that. Same.
And the only way you do that is by working smarter.
Yeah.
And that the work you create needs to have greater impact. So while my ambition is to work as little as possible, I still do a lot of things, but I do a lot more things now than I probably used to, because I've just carried on learning how to use the software, whether it's the Adobe stuff, messing around with the AI stuff, just improve my own writing skills, taking the time to write lots of essays, or having conversations with people about topics which weren't necessarily on my radar, but will inform future conversations I have and future problem solving I'm going to have.
I love that sentiment of working smarter. That really speaks to me. It's not necessarily looking to reduce your hours loads. It's being smarter about how you spend your time and maximising the value that you bring to a creative team. Is that something, because of your background in agencies, I imagine to be very competitive and very, very hardworking, especially perhaps a few years ago. Has your attitude to working smarter changed considerably moving to a business rather than an agency?
Not really. I loved advertising because I'm innately competitive.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun to be able to tackle a brief with a partner. And sometimes it was either against, you're trying to produce the winning idea against the rest of your studio or for the client and like move things forward. Winning is great. It's a great endorphin hit. One of the things that bothered me about advertising was the amount of wastage, though.
Okay.
So you get these rounds of creative reviews, which get the work to a certain level. And then internally, you'll go through more reviews. And then you'll go finally to the client and say, here's the work. And the client will be like, I don't know where this came from. Start again, change a bunch of stuff. I mean, some of my projects on Unilever would take like 18 months from briefing to delivering the assets.
Yeah.
And that was just rounds and rounds of research, but also just miscommunication. And so one of the things that I noticed there was like, we can do this better. We waste too much energy on things that will never get beyond a PowerPoint slide. So, okay. That's why I also went in-house. That's also why I worked with Giles Rees-Jones and, Olivia and Jane and Michelle, my gang, to like basically create a working model that is about being productive, getting from the first creative actor, which is the brief, to a made thing as quickly as you can, and then improve and improve and improve. Yeah, so that's kind of like how I think of working smarter. Is like, just can you reduce the amount of time of feeling out a solution?
Yeah.
And then miscommunicating it over and over again. Can you be much more direct and honest with the people you're working with? Get feedback, learn how to ask for feedback, learn how to get people to give you good feedback. It's a really complicated skill.
Yeah.
And being able to do that that's made a bigger impact than any software I've worked on, is the people side of creativity.
I feel like I can hear that in the way you speak about creative problem solving. It's not about necessarily the creative process, it's about the challenge that you're solving. And so I suppose that as an attitude already starts to point you in a certain direction, allows you to move a little bit quicker and a little bit smarter, I imagine.
Yeah, it's like at what3words, we don't get that many brand new problems that we've never bumped into before. So you almost always have a starting point. Even if your starting point is don't do this.
Yeah.
And then from there you can start to work quite quickly. But the trick is to avoid surprises. So we work with, it's a hard thing to do, but open docs. So my writers, when they're writing their scripts, I can stick my nose in and see where they're up to, but so can the CEO. Like all the stakeholders can, if so inclined, see what the status is on a project while it is live and being crafted and worked on. And when you're doing that kind of thing, what you do is you reduce the amount of blindsiding and that kind of knowledge gap, which is usually where ideas die, where you're going from, I go away with the brief and I get all like, this is mine, look how clever this is. And then I come to you and I go, Daisy, look how awesome this idea is. And you're like, I can't even remember what the brief is.
Yeah.
I don't know why this is clever. So that closing that gap is it's a piece of engineering, I suppose. That's a piece of problem solving in itself. That moves things so much faster than project management software.
Yeah, that's fair. I think we've all looked for that kind of ta-da moment, and you shouldn't wait that long. When you're in a safe team that you trust very much, then you can have a more collaborative environment and you can input along the way.
Yeah, it's not your idea. All ideas have been had. It's our idea. And by articulating the problem, which is a good question, you've already started to solve it. So a good brief, everyone goes on about good briefs and good questions because that actually gets you to good answers. Then be open. Like I said, creativity is a broad church. And the more you give away and coach, actually the better the work becomes.
Yeah.
And the more satisfying it is. It goes from I'm clever to damn, we're clever. And everyone goes, Daisy's really clever. Like, you get the kudos without having to take total ownership of things.
Yeah, that's super smart. And I'm really pleased that you started to highlight some of the differences between your life in agencies and your role in-house, which is obviously a super creative and productive environment. When you I would love to share some advice with people along this conversation. Do you look for very different skill sets and attributes when you recruit, when you look for people for joining the team in-house versus the qualities you looked for in an agency? Are they very different?
Craft-wise, not really. Attitude-wise, yes. And I was guilty of this as an advertising professional. Hubris is a terrible thing, feeling like you're right all the time.
Yeah.
And that's because of the way the advertising industry is set up, that you keep pitching. You go in and you pitch an idea, or I come to you with the solutions, like, this is the right solution, client. I'm going to sell you on it. All this language is there to make you feel like you're the one who comes with the answers. You have this feeling of rightness. When you work inside of a business, that is not a thing. So if you work in a tech business, the coders do a stand-up every day, and they have their code checked by their peers. Right? So nothing can ever go out into the world without it having been checked and verified. And again, this point of no surprises. Surprise in code is like disaster zone.
Yeah.
So then you come in as, and I did exactly this. I came in as an advertising person going, oh, I'm going to hold onto my stuff. I'm going to try and force an idea onto my clients, my internal clients. And that was soundly rejected. And so I know that if I'm going to bring someone into the business, they need to be open to the business, not just design or being a marketing manager or only caring about social content. You actually have to care about the mission of the business and how your part kind of plays into the bigger mission. When you think of it like that, it's actually really useful. I think it's really good for our youngest team members who this is their first job.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be spoiled because everywhere else they go is going to be slightly. It's not going to be quite the same, but you get responsibility, you get accountability really quickly. And the way we work with projects is it's like you're on the project team and you take it from the beginning to end. You are responsible through the whole process. You don't just get to hand off, or someone just goes, oh, we'll pretend your contribution didn't happen. You're on the whole thing. And when you do that over and over again, I think you get a sense of satisfaction much faster. You get experience on a lot of things very quickly.
Yeah.
You also learn how to deal with teammates, and the personalities involved.
Which is a fascinating aspect of being in a creative team. I love the sound of giving people whole projects. It's something that you can really miss out on in an agency structure. How else do you make a team feel very valued? That's obviously something that you have at what3words. What have you done to foster a culture where everyone has valid input and is accountable and valued for what they do?
All right, so that's a work in progress all the time.
Yeah.
It's a thing you aspire to, I think. So partly it's company values. One of our values is make new mistakes, which basically says ideas are welcome. Please do your research first. And if it's a new idea or an old idea reframed and whose time has come, we'll give it a go. But the deal is with the more seasoned colleagues who've been in the company for a while is to keep an open ear. And if something is a new thing to try, go for it. And that keeps the flow going. That then helps. It sets the rule for people who are new into the team to understand the rules of engagement.
Yeah.
They can expect that deal back. So if I don't kind of live up to that value, then I should be called out for it.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of thing that you're working on culturally all the time.
That speaks to the importance of investing in your team, which is something we touched off previously. What essential skills do you feel perhaps younger creatives are missing out on a little bit that we need to recognize and work on as an industry?
It's interesting you call it an industry, right? The funny thing is we used to have a creative industry. And it was advertising and design, and we got lumped in a segment. And then next to it was tourism, and next to it was travel, and next to that is, I don't know, power grids, whatever. But I think what's happened is we're in the midst of this happening, is that the creative industry is kind of shattering, and creative practices are turning up in every other industry. And I think that's a useful, for me anyway, it's a useful way to like frame how on earth how do we keep the practice going? How do we support new people coming into these departments who need to have good jobs, contribute meaningfully to businesses, bring creativity and creative problem solving, the thing that we are very good at and someone in finance is not going to be necessarily good at and doesn't want to do. How do we take ownership of that role? How do we make it important? And I think that's the training young and new creative people need to be getting. They need to have a sense of their self-worth in terms of what do you actually bring to a business, understand how to engage with the rest of the business. So the idea of language and translation is really important. Even in kind of classic creative industry, you might put, UX into the same bucket as design.
Yeah.
But actually, your acronyms might be the same, but your meaning is completely different. When you're talking about product design and kind of communication design, you're never going to be the thing that matters to you is slightly different. That perspective is different, and that's the kind of skill that is really important to learn earlier rather than later, because that makes you much more adaptable. And at the very least, you think to yourself, what am I not understanding here? And what are they not understanding? And how do I bridge that gap? When you can do that, then you become more valuable.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, I think that's a core thing that I think is very hard to teach as well without experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you've really changed my perspective actually on what I have been calling the industry there, actually. It's a really important shift that we need to make to leverage the impact creativity has on businesses. But like you say, without someone really championing that would be a really hard thing to bring into a business. Have you got any perhaps resources that people could use if someone's, for example, there's only a very small studio and the business perhaps doesn't value design as much or creativity as much as it could yet? Is there any resources or things that people can look at to help have that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I've written a bunch of essays about it. A good place as well is to join a group of like-minded people. So groups like iHelp and the in-house creative agency leader thing and Inside Out.
Yeah.
Those are good communities to join. So I joined Inside Out because I was lonely. You come from ad agency world and you kept going to award shows and you were surrounded by like-minded people who all had very similar experience. And then you go into a tech company and you're like, whoa, I have no friends here.
Yeah.
But when you join a community of people like the Inside Out crew, what happens is you go, oh my goodness, everyone's having a slightly different experience and you can learn from each other because I haven't seen a book that just answers it. There's no like magic answer to go, oh yeah, how do I get my CEO to reframe how they're thinking about creativity of their people or the whole business, and how are they thinking about how they present themselves to the world, the value of design thinking or good advertising, brand thinking. It's like but that's the barrier. It's like convincing people who have not had to use it as a competitive advantage yet, getting them to understand, that's hard. I actually think that's more, I'm kind of at that stage of talking about this, where talking to creative directors and creative people is lovely, but they are not the ones I need to convince that creativity is important to an organization.
Yeah, good point.
I need to be talking to chief operating officers and CFOs and CEOs so that they go, oh, hang on a second, there's a skill set we're missing in the boardroom.
Yes.
The skill set is, I was at an away day a bunch of years ago with what3words. And so it's the kind of senior management team sitting around a room and we're kind of talking about what we do and, the finance and head of people and blah, blah, blah. And it came to me and I was like, how can I be pithy about this? And I said, yeah, I'm Ivan. I deal with the feelings.
Nice.
And everyone looked at me and were like, yeah, we don't do feelings. I was like, I know. That's my team's role, is to communicate to the world and that people like us. And just that little bit of, it felt like, maybe I'm playing it bigger in my head than it actually was at the time, but it felt like a real nice breakthrough way of going, yeah, there's like the safe, they're not easy things, but they're like controllable things. Processes are controllable. Other people are not. And that is something that people who are creative, and I do this on purpose, like they're kind of, in apostrophes, like, the creative person. Why is that weird? Because I think we're all creative.
Yeah.
I think we should not be using that label too often. We should talk about what we make and what we do. And then there's a kind of creative process which everyone should be able to access. And it's a difficult conversation to have because you're kind of always in this like middle weird ground. What I don't like about being called creative is that it creates an other. So you're creative and I do the product bit. And I'm like, well, I do sales and you're creative. I'm like, well, is that because you're more important than me, or you're not creative, or you don't actually make things up in order to sell stuff? It's all rubbish, So I think that otherness is a thing you also have to break down constantly.
It's a really good point, and it's something that is hopefully being highlighted as more people move and more in-house creative studios are being produced and more people are bringing creative talent in-house, is recognizing that. So we're in a wave of people having that same kind of epiphany around that, the fact that creative thinking is essential in business decisions. So it feels like we're on that wave. And you mentioned there about the language that we use, and there's still a lot of importance put on job titles, for example. Mm-hmm. And I see that because people want to move up in their career, obviously. But do you see similarly, are job titles irrelevant in a creative team?
No, they're a signal, right? It's not a signal I completely believe in, though. So there's I want to be a senior designer so that everyone else in the business respects me. Well, no, you can be a senior designer and everyone else will laugh at you if they think you are laughable. Like, that's just the way the world is.
Yeah.
It's much more important to act like a senior, or act like the character you want to be seen as. So I think we chase the titles too often. Mm. And I'm, I suppose, lucky because I've got a big title. I will tell you that having a chief creative officer next to your name is also a hindrance.
Okay.
Because it suddenly caps you.
Right.
It suddenly says, oh, you're important. You don't do the little things. And I'm like, well, actually, no, I do as much design as anyone else in the business. It's just that my role has more strategic input. And that's mostly because I've just done it. But that, those titles get you to a stage, but they can also like knock you out of the job pool. Mm. When you become creative director, that's fine. But then like every job you have from there on has to be creative director or better. I think there's a big, one of the changes that's happening, especially with kind of, I suppose, a lot of redundancies and the shrinking of kind of the classic creative industries is, people who have been taken on titles and been like moved up the management line now have to like drop back down again. Yeah. It's a hard thing on the ego. It's like a bit of a hit. Better to not worry about the title so much. It's about what have you done? What can you do? What responsibility are you given? That's more key, I think. And I know that, if you're young and you want more money, the promotion game is the way you think you're going to get your bumps up. That you're going to hit a wall.
Yeah.
It might be after 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, but you're going to hit this like ceiling where the next job is like God King of the universe. And you're like, oh my goodness, so now what do I do? Like, I can't get another job. And the
Yeah.
answer to that is no, you are who you are, and it doesn't really matter what the title is. It's like, what are people giving you to do? What roles are you taking?
Yeah, that's a really refreshing perspective on something that I see as a little bit of an issue, is that people, it's a very competitive field, and therefore working your way up in terms of seniority and job title and salary is super important, and something that people get really sucked into in a tough kind of industry. I think you need a lot of confidence to set job title aside, because that's where it can come from for a lot of people. Where do you personally get your confidence from? You obviously have, a career behind you. You've achieved so much. You must know yourself very well now. What gives you confidence?
A lot of hard lessons.
Okay.
I've been through my own a variety of crises over the years. The thing that, as a young designer and art director, what gets you through that early phase, well, for me particularly, was being competitive.
Yeah.
Loving good ideas, wanting to be the smartest one in the room. And what I saw in our industry was that my self-esteem was tied to whether I'd had a good idea, an externally validated idea,
Mm-hmm.
or not. And I mean, I went through a patch, and my boss at the time will probably deny this, but it was basically a year of him saying no.
Right.
Not that that's not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. And I kept coming back. And I think what I learned from that was, I'm not the idea on the piece of paper. Like, you need that separation of your work and your self-worth.
Yeah.
But that external validation can come in lots of different ways. It can come from getting promoted, getting a bigger account, people listening to you, being taken to Cannes for the awards. Winning awards is really good for that kind of external validation.
Yeah.
You feel like, oh, I'm really good. And then you've won Cannes Gold, and then you win nothing for 2 years. And you did the same amount of work. So now are you crap? And the answer to that is no, you're not crap. And I've been through enough of those cycles to go, okay, I understand what is happening emotionally. Like, the roller coaster is heavy.
Yeah.
And because I got so used to that high and low, that even, a piece of work I didn't really care about getting, green research results, and being able to go to the next phase was a win. Getting red was a low, and you just get connected to this up and down. So I've learned to detach myself from that. What I've also learned, though, is if you detach yourself too much, you don't stay motivated, and you don't actually fight for things you're interested in. Yeah. So staying interested in the work is very key. I think we're very lucky in terms of makers, whether you're a writer, a designer, video, whatever, is that your portfolio is really the thing that matters. You can have all the titles in the world, I've had some good ones, but when the work was horrible and I didn't feel it, everyone could tell.
Yeah.
So being more focused enough on the right kind of work and your own output, and finding ways to not necessarily put yourself into it, but be interested in the work and improve the work, improve yourself, learn more skills. And that, I suppose, comes back to the original question around, how do I keep learning, is that in order to create work that's interesting to me still, I either need to do it with a bigger team, different kinds of teams, different processes, be open to quite radical changes in the way the industry works, the way technology works, but knowing that whatever room I get put into, I will probably do exactly the same thing. I will try and solve a problem in a particular way, and staying connected to the things that actually I'm quite good at.
Yeah.
So I can draw. I can draw a little bit, mostly cartoons, but keeping the drawing is really key for me to stay connected to the idea, because if I just work in Illustrator or Photoshop or Figma, it gets quite cold. It lacks some spontaneity. So I know that if I stick to the way I like to work, I will generally kind of enjoy enjoy the process more.
That's a really healthy attitude to creativity, because to your point around riding those highs and lows of external validation is you hear you're only as good as your last great idea, and those sort of quite horrible phrases that can probably be quite damaging when you're in a competitive field. So it sounds like you've got a fantastic, your own approach to creativity, which I love.
It's also okay to be bad for a few days.
Yeah.
Or, it's like not all ideas are equal. So accepting you're going to have bad ideas. It's okay. I got some advice from a creative director of mine, Jerry Human, and he said, when I was still young, I was like, I don't know, 20, 21, 22. We were in the car and he says to me, Picasso made a lot of work. He painted and painted and painted. But he reckons like at least, 9 out of every 10 paintings wasn't that good.
No
But he just
way.
kept painting. And that's a good approach to process. Matisse was exactly the same thing. Like, why are some artists or some practitioners, why do they have more hits? Well, it's because they don't stop. They keep going, and then they twist and reinvent, but their work ethics remains.
Yeah.
And you can see this through the world's most awarded ad industry creatives, but you can also see this in the world's best coders, the world's best salespeople, is the ability to turn up again. Chuck Close is brilliant for this. Chuck Close turns up and he paints squares. He doesn't worry about the painting he's working on. He paints squares. And but that is a creative act in itself.
Yeah. And it speaks to the work ethic that you have as well, very much. And that's something that can really be a roller coaster, I suppose, throughout your life stages, and can be impacted by loads of external factors, obviously, like in your life, in your family, and those sorts of things. Do you feel that there's a peak age for working in a creative field or a predominantly creative role today?
Yes, whatever age I'm at that moment.
Nice.
No, I don't. I think we are lucky to have so much access to technology that allows you to make almost anything you can imagine. Where it was impossible for me to edit a film up, on a computer at home up until about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Now you can do it online. The speed of things has changed so much. So the democratization and access to tools to make is fantastic now. So I think if you've got something to make or something to say to the world, you have the means. And if you are, I suppose, grow up with social media, you have a means of getting it out into the world as well.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly. So I think what we've got is a leveling in access. The thing that I think, you can get into like the whole, what has the internet done? And I don't mean just social media. I mean, like, what has internet access done to creative people is that they look at other people's work too often.
Yeah.
And we get stuck in the zone of my work isn't as good as this portfolio I've just seen or this piece of work, which is genius. And what you always fail to remember, because we've got small brains, is that is the curated perfect piece of work that person has spent years making lots of pieces for this one piece to be famous.
Yeah.
So relax. Bring it back down to like, okay, what am I making? Not comparing to others. I think that is if I had one piece of advice, it's like, don't compare yourself to other people you'll never meet and very limited amounts of work. It's better to go deep on a designer and see everything they've made and go, oof, lots of crap. Some beautiful pieces that I really love. And then, but that gives you a better idea of where you stand in comparison to the world. Talking back to kind of, I suppose, generational, it's like the ability to work with people whose work you admire. It's like my portfolio is online and I tell my studio to go look at it.
Nice.
They should be able to, you shouldn't take advice from people you don't trust.
Yeah.
Fine. If you don't like my work, you probably don't want to work with me. Or cherry pick what you listen to and then like work with.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's a cool. That's the studio. That's like a classic studio. You go work with people whose work you admire, you can learn from, and who will push you. And then you get tired of them, you move on, you create your own studio, and then more people come up underneath you, and they learn from you. We were an unbroken line of creativity.
Great advice in terms of, not being too harsh on yourself and comparing, but just working on your own practice, I think is a wonderful thing and a great bit of advice to people entering the wider industries that are all influenced by creativity. And Ivan, thank you so much for your honesty. You've really changed my perception actually on the role of creativity in business. And I'm going to try and catch myself talking about the creative industry at large now, because it influences so much more than that. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.